Hello everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to introduce a new risk indicator we just launched for Litecoin. If you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter, where we put out regular updates about our risk indicators and more. So if you're returning to the channel, you've seen these types of graphs very often. What I'm showing you here is the price history of Litecoin over time with the price in logarithmic form. Each dot is a day, and each day is color-coded based on the output of our risk indicator, the upside-downside potential indicator, or UDPI. A score of 5 means high risk. That's when the upside potential is quite low, downside potential is quite high. -5 is low risk. That's when the downside potential is quite low, upside potential is quite high. And so what you can see is that over time, the UDPI has done a pretty good job of tracking these movements in Litecoin's price. It's able to catch these lower risk kind of bottoming out points, as well as these higher risk tops or local tops, these higher risk zones that tend to precede deep corrections. Now, there's some things that I think are interesting to look at with Litecoin's past, and that might help kind of explain some of its more recent price actions. So, of course, Litecoin is one of the older crypto assets that's out there. You know, it kind of got its inception all the way back in 2013. Was able to put in some big moves back then, and then really had its biggest run going into the 2017 bull market. And then has kind of been consolidating, kind of trading sideways since there, tested those highs again in the spring, and now has not been able to get back up to those highs yet again. And one thing I think is interesting is, you know, like the rest of the crypto market, you know, Litecoin really did explode coming out of the March of 2020 crash. But one thing I think is interesting to look at on this particular chart here is this idea that the model kind of consistently throughout this whole run here thought that Litecoin could still have more upside potential to realize, but Litecoin just never was really able to do it, right? It kept kind of getting rejected. You know, it kind of overheated here up to kind of these levels, had to consolidate, came back up, had to consolidate, came back up, and then ultimately crashed back down. And one thing that to speculate about why this might have happened, it's possible that there were just a lot of bag holders from back here. A lot of people who had bought in during this local high back here in late 2017, early 2018, who then were using this opportunity to basically cash out. You know, if they were getting near to their cost basis of where they had entered back over here, they might have just been using this as a place to get out. And that might have essentially just kind of hampered Litecoin's ability to break out. You know, Litecoin never really entered price discovery. It never broke really decisively past its previous all-time high, where maybe it could have really realized some of that upside potential gone on a parabolic run. It just never was able to do that. And one possible reason potentially for why that might have happened is that if people were just selling off old coins that they had accumulated back up here because they just wanted to get out while they could at no loss, that might have added selling pressure here that really kind of dampened it. Because from the model's perspective, it thinks Litecoin could have gone higher had things been a little bit different. Sellers stepping in who maybe had bought at these levels could potentially be one thing, in addition to all the people who would just be taking profit from these lower levels as well. Now, that's just speculation, but I think it's just an interesting thing to look at here. And it's one of those things with these assets that before they're able to kind of enter that price discovery, it's always this kind of potential for selling pressure as you get back up to these higher points where people might be getting closer to their cost basis, who, you know, might have been spooked by being down large percentages from those entry points and might just be trying to get out immediately, not hoping it breaks up much further. I think we can also just see this if we look at the raw output of the model. So here I'm just charting the UDPI level across time. So, you know, 5 high risk, -5 low risk. And we can really just kind of see this play out where there seems to be these kind of key points of resistance potentially for Litecoin kind of throughout its entire history. You'll see that this range between 2 and 3 has often acted as this kind of resistance point for Litecoin. You know, it's what it got up to in its initial run before correcting all the way back down. Got it kind of that intermediate point in its parabolic run in 2017. It kind of had to consolidate for several months at these levels before it was able to put, or after it printed this result, before it was able to put in the next leg of its parabolic run. And then, of course, in the spring, this was kind of the general region it got rejected from. Again, you know, multiple times. Every time it tried to push up through, it just kind of kept on getting rejected all the way down to the big summer correction. So if we look at where we currently stand with Litecoin, you know, we're kind of just ranging in this general range between -1 and 1 risk. So essentially, it's you know, Litecoin is realizing some of its upside potential, but it's not able to kind of maintain the rally, corrects down, then the upside potential starts outweighing the downside, so it's been moving up again, and now it's back down here again. And we'll just have to see what happens with the market. It's very possible if the market catches a bounce, Litecoin will just move back up. And really what we might want to look for then is, can Litecoin really start to realize some of that upside potential it has built up? Can it really break through some of these levels, get to some of these higher risk levels to really realize some of that upside potential? Because really that's what you'd want to see if you're a Litecoin holder, right? You don't want to just keep getting rejected off of these levels, kind of just ranging in these kind of middle risk levels. Really what you want to do is, if you acquired at these low risk levels, you'd want to see it really shoot up in a parabolic run, and then the risk, realize all that upside potential, and then have it get back up to these higher levels of risk that it has seen in its past. So again, it's hard to tell right now what's going to happen. Overall, the risk indicator seems to think it's an overall favorable risk reward ratio. So that's what I'm showing you here, just the current raw level of the UDPI. And so the way you can interpret this is 0 is where the model thinks it's roughly an equal risk reward proposition, that the upside and downside potentials are about the same. If you're in the negative territory, that means it thinks the upside potential is outweighing the downside potential. But for Litecoin, you can see it's not an extreme imbalance here, right? The model thinks there's a little bit more upside potential than downside, but it's not an extreme deviation or anything like that. It's not anything to get super excited about, but it's also certainly nothing to be concerned about. If we're not into those higher ranges where Litecoin has tended to see massive corrections out of. This is kind of a more neutral stance here. So none of this is financial advice. You should form your own opinions about how to kind of navigate if you hold Litecoin, what you should do with it. But this is just what the model thinks about Litecoin right now. It's kind of neutral, maybe a little bit more in the favorable risk reward range than not. But I think certainly if we put Litecoin in the context of a lot of other crypto assets, so here at Upside Down Data, we're tracking many different assets in real time. We have 23 now, and we're adding more every week. So follow the channel if you want to keep apprised of those new assets as we launch indicators for them. But you'll see that, Litecoin's in the negative, but there's a lot of other assets in the space that not only are in the negatives, but are in the deep negatives that seem to be offering more favorable risk reward ratios at this given point in time. HBAR had been the one that was the deepest into the negatives for a while. It's actually, now it's VET, but HBAR actually had a pretty nice bounce today. It's up about 17% last time I checked. And that's totally expected for these kind of assets that are in these low risk zones. They're kind of exhausting their downside potential. It seems reasonable that can happen. Now, again, that doesn't mean that these assets can't ever realize any more downside potential. There's still room to move to the downside. It could certainly happen. But certainly when we see these kind of bounces from these low risk levels, it makes a lot of sense, because the model is saying that from a historical perspective, it would be pretty unprecedented it actually would be unprecedented for the asset to move down below kind of 5, 5 being the lowest risk point the assets ever attained. It would be historically remarkable if the assets were able to get back down to that level. So when you see them bottoming out at this level, the model thinks it's increasingly unlikely for them to keep on realizing more downside potential. So we'll have to see what happens in the market if this bounce kind of continues. I think if we do see a bounce, it'll probably be across the whole market. So I would personally expect Litecoin to move up with the rest of the broader market. But the bigger question is, would Litecoin reap greater rewards than some of the other assets, or would it really be some of these lower risk ones that have really tapped at their downside potential that might really spike up in the future? We'll have to wait and see what happens. Obviously with these bounces, they're going to be different assets that kind of run faster further than other ones, and it's hard to kind of know which ones. But certainly I'm going to be watching these low risk ones and see how they react. And if this bounce continues, if the bottom is kind of in with the market, it'll be interesting to see how much upside potential they're able to realize and how quickly they're able to put in that work to get them back towards kind of these more neutral risk levels. So none of this is financial advice. There's nothing to say that we have to catch a bounce here, but I just think it's something that's interesting to note. And certainly what I'll be watching for is if there's certain assets that run first that kind of indicate a broader reversal in the market, then those might present opportunities where maybe they can put in a big multiples before they overheat, but then other ones will follow them afterwards. And that's something that we also like to watch on this channel, that if a certain asset runs early and then gets back up into these higher risk zones, especially if it's coming out of a low risk zone, really realizes a bunch of upside potential, puts in a multiple X move to the upside, for example, then anyone who has a position in that could maybe see that as a signal that they should take profits out of that asset and maybe move them into one of the other assets that hasn't moved yet, or to the same kind of degree. And especially if it seems like we're in a broader uptrend in the market, it's reasonable to think that more assets are going to follow in the background. So you should form your own strategies, but that's just one of the things that we look at. And one of the things that we think is really useful about having these multiple risk gauges across the crypto space is that you can monitor which ones are running first. And then if you have a position in those, they can give you an indication of when taking profits and maybe moving into a different asset might be advantageous. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. And remember, with UDPI, we're all going to make it.